Hi, it's Lara back with part 2 of Witchy Wednesday for January 8th to 14th, 2020. So if you have not watched part 1 for this video, then please do have a listen to that, because none of this is going to make a whole lot of sense without that piece. In this part 2 of this video, and I did it in 2 parts this week because there's so much going on, there's so much to say that I didn't want to rush. And so this part will be mostly focused on each of the signs and where these major astrological events are playing out for you. And so we do this in a general forecast based first and foremost on rising sign. I will remind you, your rising sign, or your otherwise called your ascendant, because in a general forecast, we can be most on point with that, right? There are some exceptions, but generally, we can speak to the house that this is happening in for you based on rising sign. And if you don't know your rising sign, then that's okay. You can find that out by either going to a birth chart calculator online. There's some free ones around. Just Google free birth chart calculator if you want to do that yourself. Or if you don't, you're not inclined to do that, or you don't know how to decipher it, you can certainly always book a reading. I do 99% of my readings via audio recording these days, and it works really well. So we don't have to schedule a specific time to be in the same room, but we can communicate, via email. Anyway, and that, having a reading, you'll know your ascendant sign, and you need a fairly good idea of your birth time to know your ascendant or your rising sign. But there's a lot of other information that can still be gleaned from the birth chart without having that information, but it does definitely help. But so listen for your ascendant or your rising, and also listen for your sun sign and your moon sign. Those 3 pieces of the puzzle are kind of, the triad or the trifecta. And they'll give you, a lot of information without having a specific reading for your chart. Okay. So just a quick reminder. What we're talking about here is the lunar eclipse in Cancer that's happening on January 10th at 20 degrees of Cancer. I might have said at least once in part 1 at 10 degrees, but I was thinking the 10th. It's happening at 20 degrees on the 10th. In the sign of Cancer. So that's the moon's home sign, right? And across the sky is all of this massive pile of energy in Capricorn. I showed you the chart in the first video, so you can look at it there. But that includes the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that we've been talking about endlessly over 2019. So the big event is actually on Sunday, when they come into an exact conversation. And but there's a lot of other energy piled up there in Capricorn as well, and this will play a role. And then I'm going to talk about the axis that's happening on, because Cancer Capricorn are opposite the sky from each other, right? So the eclipse is happening in Cancer, and then all of that other energy, including the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, are happening in Capricorn opposite the sky. So when there's an opposition, it's like this tension, this pulling both ways, this push and pull, this need for balancing things, right? So that's what we feel with an opposition. And then, so I'll talk about the axis for each sign that's happening. And then I will also speak to where Uranus is stationing direct. So I spoke about the significance of that in the part 1 of this video as well. But Uranus is stationing direct in a specific house for each of us. And we'll cover that here as well. Okay, deep breath before I launch in. We're going to start with Cancer, because this eclipse is happening in your sign, Cancer. And you're one of the major players right now with all of this energy, right? You and Capricorn opposite the sky each other. and trying to bring things into balance for all of us. So if you have planets, points, sun, moon, rising around, I should have mentioned this before, but around the 20-degree mark of Cancer, Capricorn, or the other two cardinal signs, which are Aries and Libra, you're going to feel this energy undoubtedly. But all of us will feel it, right? And it sort of depends on what's going on in our own birth chart too. And then if you've got planets, points around the 2-degree Taurus mark where Uranus is stationing direct, then so that would be Taurus or the other fixed signs, which are Scorpio, Leo, and Aquarius. If you have anything around the 2-degree mark, give or take, several degrees on either side, then that Uranus impact will be felt. The Uranus conversation is a trine, so that's a supportive, more flowing conversation. It is in trine to the all the energy in Capricorn. So, Cancer, once again, let's start with you. This eclipse is obviously happening in your sign, and all of the energy in Capricorn is right across the sky. So the eclipse is happening in your first house of this self, of who you are in your physical incarnation. So your physical body, your physical vitality, your physical appearance. It's about your instinctual approach to the world. If you think of the first house as being, us being birthed into the world, right? It's our first interaction when we, come out of the mother. And so it's like this, however we respond, right? It's unfamiliar to us. We're just responding on instinct. And so the first house represents that. And it represents how we appear to the world, how we present to the world, how the world perceives us as well. So that's where the eclipse is happening. And so, with an eclipse, a lunar eclipse, like with any full moon, only it's amped up more. This is a time of some kind of big release, culmination, a letting go, a something coming to fruition, or something being revealed, or coming into your awareness, or perhaps being eclipsed out as well. So in the first house, and then across the sky, all the Capricorn energy has been focused on your 7th house of the other, right? So this is the axis of self and other, axis of relationship, it's known as. Relationship to the self, relationship to other. And so there's been a lot of restructuring going on in this area of your chart with Saturn and Pluto there. And a lot of, lessons, a lot of work kind of thing. And so with this conjunction happening, it's not like this is new information for you, really. What's going on in the 7th house. It's more about reaching some kind of a climax. It's the word I'm looking for, sorry. As Saturn and Pluto are coming right together, right? Those energies are blending. And so this won't necessarily be any big surprise to you. But there is a need at this particular time, with the eclipse opposing all of this, to have some kind of a balance, right? There could be a bit of tension between those two areas of the chart, self and other. And then what may bring you some unexpected happenings, events, news, insights is the 11th house, because that's where that's where Uranus is stationing direct. So Uranus stationing direct right after the eclipse, and in your 11th house of, I'm just fixing my blanket that I have on my lap because I'm cold. So your 11th house is the house of friendships, of groups, of organizations, of clubs and associations. It is about networks, including, the like internet networking as well, kind of thing. So internet groups and that kind of thing. Also, it speaks to your hopes and dreams for the future and the people that walk the same path as you, and benefactors that can kind of help you reach those hopes and dreams, right? How you can gain forward momentum towards your hopes and dreams, and how you can make gains there. So Uranus is bringing some kind of surprises in that area of life, and ultimately whatever shakes down there or shakes up there, because Uranus likes to shake things up, is helpful in the, even if in the moment it might seem a bit disorienting, it's ultimately helpful because this is a conversation of support that Uranus is having. So that's for you, Cancer. Please do listen to the introduction. It will give you all the context for what I've just said. We're going to move on to Gemini. Gemini, you have the second 8th house axis being lit up for you, right? So, because those two houses are across the sky from each other. That is the axis of form, like the physical material form, versus transformation. So the second house is where the eclipse in Cancer is happening for you. And that house speaks to resources, like your own personal resources, the skills and talents you use to kind of make money or make your way in the world. It has to do with material possessions. It has to do with what you value and what you place worth on, and your own self-worth. Also has to do with food, really, and kind of like what we put in our bodies too. I think I've mentioned that at least once before. But so something in that area is coming to this culmination point, this massive release, this letting go, this time where something that you may have not been consciously aware of comes to your consciousness or your awareness. It can be a time where something is sort of eclipsed out as well in that second house area. And then it's happening across the sky from all the Capricorn energy in the 8th house, where there's been a lot of restructuring and a lot of, hard work going on for you. And the 8th house has to do with other people's resources. So that's one of the things. And those are, specifically things like taxes, insurance, loans, debts, wills, inheritance, all of these kinds of things. Money that comes to us and resources that come to us through others. Resources, can also be time and energy. I see it like that as well. And then we've got in the 8th house, also, and it's related to other people's resources, at least I see it that way. It's the house of intimacy and intimate connections and how we feel vulnerable. And intimacy is not just about the physical, right? Being intimate is like bearing your soul to another. So that's 8th house, and that can feel vulnerable. It's about those things that we can kind of keep hidden or secret, about that, occult, hidden knowledge sort of thing, and our psychological wounding and healing. So it covers a lot of ground, but it's essentially intimacy, vulnerability, shared resources. That's sort of the way that I see it. So this is the axis that's being lit up, and there is some tension here between the 2nd and the 8th house with an opposition, right? And something needs to be worked out. Something needs to be balanced. There's some give and take that has to happen here. And you'll know what that is because particularly in the 8th house, this has been a long haul project, right? That's been going on there, and it's reaching some kind of climax now, and it'll continue to play out over the next months as well. But it's reaching a real precipice. And then Gemini, Uranus is stationing direct in your 12th house. So Uranus is bringing some sudden insights, perhaps some shocking, realizations or information, or liberation Uranus is the liberator. So it can liberate you as well, free you, right? In the 12th house of what's hidden from the world. So this is like includes things like our dreams and our subconscious and our spiritual life and connections, the spiritual realm. It includes what goes on behind closed doors that's hidden away from the world. So how we spend time in solitude and reflection, isolation. It can have to do with the our habits that sabotage us as well. And it can have to do quite literally with places behind closed doors, hospitals, hospices, prisons, rehabilitation facilities, ashrams, spiritual retreat centers, anything like that that's behind, kind of closed away from the world. So this is where Uranus is bringing this flash of insight. Ultimately, or some kind of happening, right? That comes as a bit of a out of left field usually with Uranus. But the thing is, it's in a positive conversation. So ultimately, this is shaking things up for the better in the long run. So just know that, if something happens, that's ultimately, it's Uranus is trying to support you right now. All right, moving on to Taurus. Taurus, we have the 3rd and 9th house axis lit up for you. 3rd and 9th across the sky from each other. And so this is the axis of communication of the lower mind, 3rd house, and the higher mind, 9th house. It is, the 3rd house is where the eclipse is happening for you. So that 3rd house of communications, all things communications of your immediate environment, right? Where we have the people in your immediate environment that usually consist of, folks like your siblings, your cousins, your neighbors, your peers, people that you interact with on the day-to-day. It has to do with learning the basics. It has to do with, learning the basics, even early childhood education or primary school. It has to do like anything that's not higher learning, because that's 9th house. It has to do with short distance travel. So not international travel. It can either be like short commutes or just short jaunts, short trips, even within your own kind of country. So there is something happening in the 9th house. Okay, so there's something. Let's just focus on the 3rd house for a minute more. The 3rd house is where the eclipse is happening. Something being in true full moon fashion, coming to culmination, fruition, release, being eclipsed out, coming up from the unconscious or into your awareness that you weren't aware of before. So in that 3rd house, and then that's opposite the 9th house, which is the higher mind, higher learning. So anything kind of learning that you do beyond the basics, it can be formal college, university, but it doesn't have to be. It has to do with your philosophies, your belief systems, that higher minded stuff. It has to do with it can have to do with religion, religious dogma. It can have to do with just like 3rd house is short distance travel. 9th house is longer distance. So international travel, or that which we learn from people in places that are foreign to us, right? Different cultures. That can even be armchair travel. You don't literally have to go somewhere, but it is related to that. So this axis is in some tension right now, requiring some balance. And, the 9th house is the area that all the Saturn-Pluto work has been being done by you. So a lot of restructuring going on there, and reaching this sort of climax point where Saturn and Pluto come together. And then, it will reverberate after the actual event. But that's what's going on there. And then you've got Uranus stationing direct in your 1st house. So the house of the self, of you, your physical body, physical appearance, instinctual approach to the world, how the world perceives you and receives you, how you present yourself out there. So Uranus is bringing some message of liberation, of sudden insight, some kind of sudden event that shakes things up, but in a good way, because it's a positive conversation that's happening, a helpful conversation. Okay, Taurus, that's for you. I'm going to move on to Aries now, where we've got this eclipse in the 4th house and all the Capricorn energy in the 10th house across the sky. So this is the axis, the 4th and 10th, of the private life, right? Home, like what goes on at home kind of thing, or in your private life. That's the 4th house. And then the 10th house is your public life. So your career, your public reputation and persona, your public legacy, these kinds of things. And so there's some tension here, right? Because this eclipse is happening opposite the Saturn-Pluto and all the energy in Capricorn. And so the eclipse is bringing to the 4th house a full moon vibe of something culminating, something being released, some catharsis, some reaching a fever pitch, something being eclipsed, or something coming into your awareness that was previously unknown. And then we've got the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn happening in the 10th across the sky. So this is an area, the 10th house, that you've had you've done a lot of work, a lot of rebuilding, restructuring, transformation, met with some obstacles, this kind of thing. So this is not a surprise to you what's going on in the 10th house, but it's reaching this culmination point. And it's in some tension, as I said, with the 4th. Some balancing required there. These two sides of life are kind of vying for your attention right now. And then you've got Uranus stationing direct in your 2nd house, right? So bringing some kind of sudden event happening, sudden insight or information, some kind of shakeup or liberation to your 2nd house of your personal resources, your material resources, your money, your personal values, what you value, what you place worth on, your self-worth. All these things fall into 2nd house. And Uranus is coming to the energy of Uranus is amplified as it stations direct. So we tend to really feel it wherever it's sitting. And for you, that's in the 2nd house. But ultimately, it wants to help because this is a positive conversation, right? A trine that's happening. So lending you some support, even if in the moment it might come as a bit of a shakeup. So that's for you, Aries. We're going to move on to Pisces. Pisces, for you, the 5th, 11th house axis is being lit up. So that's the axis of the individual versus the collective, right? Your own personal creations versus collaborations versus the group. And so the 5th house, where the eclipse in Cancer is happening, is about your children you work with, anything you create, your individual creative self-expression, right? Creative projects. What sparks joy for you, how you have fun in life, pleasure seeking, that kind of thing. And the eclipse is bringing some full circle moment, some culmination point, something to be released and let go, something being eclipsed, something coming into your awareness that maybe you were not previously aware of. And then in the 11th house across the sky, that area of life that has to do with groups and associations and clubs and your hopes and dreams for the future, friendship groups, people that walk the same path as you, benefactors, all of this is where a lot of hard work and restructuring has been going on for you. And it's, that's reaching a culmination point as well. So those two areas of life are vying for your attention right now. And there may be a balancing act required. And then we've got Uranus stationing direct in your 3rd house. So Uranus bringing some kind of urge for freedom, liberation, some kind of shakeup, some kind of sudden happening or event in your third house of siblings, peers, cousins, neighbors, people in your immediate environment, people that you interact with kind of regularly, any kind of communication related things, even short commutes, short trips, that kind of thing. So whatever this is that Uranus is bringing in or sparking for you, ultimately this, even though it might feel like a bit of upheaval or shakeup at the time, it's ultimately for the better because it's a positive conversation that Uranus is having here. So know that. Okay, Pisces, I'm going to move on to Aquarius because we're already at the 25-minute mark here and we've still got half the signs to go. So Aquarius, this eclipse is happening in your 6th house in Cancer, opposite Saturn-Pluto and all the other energy in the 12th house of Capricorn. So 6th, 12th house axis is this axis of, excuse me, the day-to-day, mundane versus the more spiritual. It has to do with our daily life and rituals and routines versus our more spiritual practices. It has to do with our kind of health routines that we take care of our health, our physical health versus our more kind of spiritual or even mental health, right? It is 12th house. So for you, this is the axis being lit up, Aquarius, and the eclipse is happening in that 6th house of the daily grind, your daily affairs, daily routine, daily tasks, including routines surrounding health and wellness, anything around health and wellness. It can have to do with pets as well, the 6th house. And so some full moon flavor is being brought to that 6th house, right, with this eclipse. Some fruition, culmination, letting go, release, that kind of thing. New information bubbling up from the depths kind of thing. And then the 12th house is where all of this restructuring has been going on for you, Aquarius. So some hard work, right, in the subconscious. Hard work that has to do perhaps with your self-sabotaging behaviors. It can have to do with your connection to the spiritual realm, even those who have passed. It can have to do with losses. It can have to do with anything that has to do with what happens behind closed doors. And that can be, on a very sort of unconscious level. It can be literal places behind closed doors as well. Hospitals, prisons, ashrams, retreat centers, rehabilitation facilities, all of this, right? 12th house. So there's some tension between the 6th and the 12th house happening right now because it's an opposition. So those two areas of life are kind of vying for your attention right now. And it may require some work to balance that. And then we've got Uranus bringing some kind of liberation, some sudden happening event, information, awareness in your 4th house of family, home, roots, relationship to, female lineage, your emotional security. So all of these things fall into the 4th house, and Uranus is shaking something up there, but ultimately it's for the better because it's a positive conversation. So even if in the moment it feels unsettling, know that it's meant to help you, okay? Whatever 4th house stuff arises. All right, moving on to Capricorn. Capricorn, whoa. So you and Cancer, right, are the big players here in all these events because you're opposite the sky each other. The lunar eclipse is happening in Cancer, which is your 7th house, and of the other. And then all of the other energy is happening in your sign, the 1st house. This is the axis of relationship, right? 7th house being other, 1st house being the self. And so there's some tension here, right? Some requiring of balance between these two houses on this axis. Some give and take necessary, perhaps some compromise necessary. And the first house is where all that hard work and restructuring have been going on for you, right? First house of your physical vitality, your physical appearance, physical health and wellness, your instinctual approach to the world, your how you are perceived by the world, right? How you show up in the world. And so, again, some tension between that, between self and other in some way, shape, or form. Reaching a real culmination point now. And then you've got Uranus stationing direct in your 5th house, which is the house of children, whether they be your children or children you're associated with. It's this house of your individual creative self-expression and your creative projects, anything you create. It has to do with what sparks joy for you, how you have fun, and what brings you pleasure. And so Uranus is bringing some surprises there, and it is ultimately positive. Even though it seems like a bit rattling, it could feel a bit rattling at the time. It is ultimately wants to bring you something positive and helpful because it's in a helpful conversation. So, it can also feel like something's liberated or freed up in this area of life as well. All right, please listen to the intro, Capricorn, okay? Because it's got all the context for what I just said to you. And that's in part 1, which there's a link to below. Moving on to Sagittarius, we've got this 8th second house axis lit up for you. So eclipse is happening in your 8th house, Sagittarius. That is the house of intimacy and vulnerability, right? Where we bear our soul. It is the resources that we share with another. So things like wills, inheritance, scholarships, bursaries, taxes, debt, this kind of thing, mortgages, all that stuff falls into the 8th house. It's what we kind of keep buried in our psyche. So it has to do with psychological healing and wounding. And then opposite the sky, all of this restructuring has been going on in your 2nd house of your worth, your self-worth, what you place value on, your material possessions and resources, including your money. And so there's been a lot of hard work happening here. And now Saturn and Pluto are meeting up exactly in your sign, and not in your sign, in Capricorn, in your 2nd house. And it's reaching this culmination point. But there's some tension between the 8th and the 2nd house right now. That both of those areas of life are vying for your attention, right? So that can require a bit of a balancing act. And then we have Uranus stationing direct on the 10th, right after the eclipse, in your 6th house. So this is the house of your daily routine, your health and wellness routines, how you are in service to others, that daily grind. And it's getting a bit of a shakeup because Uranus is stationing direct. Some kind of sudden information can come in, or you can feel liberated suddenly with regards to something in this area of life. You freed up, or you freed yourself, but it's ultimately positive because it's in a positive conversation. So whatever shakeup happens here is for the better. That's for you, Sag. And I'm going to move on to Scorpio now, where Scorpio, what's happening for you is the 9th and 3rd house are being lit up. The eclipse is happening in your 9th house of the higher mind, of higher learning, of long distance travel, of what we learn from people and places that are different from us, right? It has to do with our philosophies and our belief systems and any kind of learning that happens beyond the basics. And so this is where the eclipse is happening. It is bringing some kind of culmination point, some coming to fruition, some release, some full circle moment, some kind of something coming to light that perhaps was not in your awareness before. And then it's opposite the 3rd house of daily communications and what's in your environment, your immediate environment, and the people in your immediate environment, like your peers and your siblings and neighbors, community members, cousins, that kind of thing, speaks to that learning we do that's sort of at the more basic level. And it has to do with all things communications. It has to do with short distance travel. And so this is the axis here of higher mind, lower mind, of communications, right? That's what we generally think of as this third house axis. So that axis is in tension right now because those two areas are kind of vying for your attention and requiring some kind of balancing act. And then we've got Uranus lighting up your 7th house. Uranus stationing direct in your 7th house, bringing some kind of sudden awareness, insight, aha moment, liberation, freeing up in your 7th house of the other, of relationship, of one-to-one personal relationships. So anybody that you're closely connected with, it can be a significant other, business relations, anybody that you have that kind of close contact with. It can also have to do with competition and rivals in the 7th house as well. But ultimately, this Uranus event is for the better because whatever it's shaking up there, it wants to shake that up to your benefit, even if in the moment it can feel a bit destabilizing. All right, so that's for you, Scorpio. Please listen to the intro for all of the context, right? And there's a lot in the intro. Moving on to Libra now. Libra, what's happening for you over this time with all this big energy is that the 10th and the 4th house are being lit up. So the 10th house is where the eclipse is happening in Cancer, and the 4th house is where the Saturn-Pluto conjunction are happening, and all the other energy in Capricorn. So these houses are opposite the sky, right? This 10th, 4th house axis speaks to the axis of the public, 10th house, and the private, 4th. So it is also sometimes known as the axis of parenting. So like sort of like the masculine, the divine father, 10th house, the divine mother, 4th house. But ultimately, and it's about our material security, right? Versus our emotional security as well. So those themes are playing a role here and requiring a balancing act because this energy is in tension in an opposition. And so the eclipse in the 10th house is bringing some full circle moment, some release, some heightened emotions, some kind of sudden awareness of something, something coming to culmination or fruition in the house of your career, your public reputation, the legacy you wish to leave, these kinds of things in the 10th house, that public house that I spoke about. And then in the 4th house, there's been a lot of hard work going on for you, a lot of restructuring, perhaps some obstacles, some transformation, that kind of thing. And that 4th house of home, family, ancestry, roots, emotional security, literal place of living, real estate, that kind of thing. And so those two things, as I said, in a bit of tension, vying for your attention at this time. And then Uranus is in your 8th house, stationing direct right after the eclipse happens on Friday. And so this is bringing a shakeup and perhaps some kind of liberation or freedom or sudden event that happens, sudden information even, in your 8th house, which has to do with where you're vulnerable, intimacy, how you bare your soul to others. It can have to do with other people's resources. So things that you share, resources that you share with others, and it has something to do with things like insurance and taxes and mortgages and even business partnerships. It has to do with, it can have to do with, debt and wills, that kind of thing as well. But ultimately whatever's happening in that 8th house, it can also have to do with our psychological wounding and healing, is whatever shakeup occurs there, even though it may feel destabilizing at the time, is ultimately there to help you in the long run. Because this is a positive conversation that Uranus is having here. So be aware of that. And try not to let it throw you off too much. Okay, we're going to move on to Virgo now. And Virgo, this eclipse is happening in your 11th house. So all these events, the Capricorn Cancer events are happening on your 11th, 5th house axis. So the eclipse is happening in the 11th house in Cancer. And then the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and all the energy in Capricorn is happening in your 5th house. So the 11th house is groups, friendships, associations, clubs, networks, including internet, groups. It has to do with your hopes and dreams for the future and the people that are walking the same path as you, and potential benefactors even. And so some full moon moment is happening in the 11th house right now, right? Something's being eclipsed, coming to fruition, culmination, release, letting go, full circle moment, this kind of thing. Opposite, the 5th house of children, family, creative projects, creative self-expression, what sparks joy for you, pleasure seeking, that's where all of this hard work and restructuring has been going on for you over 2019. And so these two houses are in a bit of tension right now and requiring a bit of a balancing act because they're both vying for your attention. And then you've got Uranus stationing direct in your 9th house. So bringing some kind of sudden event, sudden awareness, sudden insight, information, liberation, freedom to your 9th house of higher learning, perhaps long distance travel, philosophy, belief system, these kinds of things, right? Teaching, learning, publication even. So some kind of sudden happening in that 9th house arena is ultimately shaking things up for the better, even if in the moment it seems a bit unsettling, because it is a positive conversation that Uranus is having there. So that's for you, Virgo. Last but not least, we have Leo. I said this wasn't going to be a super long video, but it is. Anyways, Leo, the 12th and 6th houses are the axis that are being lit up for you, right? So the 12th house is where the eclipse is happening. 12th house, what happens behind closed doors? What happens in the subconscious? It is our dreams, our connection to spirituality, our spiritual health, how we sabotage ourselves, how we spend time in reflection and solitude and isolation and recovery. It has to do with losses. It can have to do with literal places behind closed doors, like hospitals and retreat centers and rehabilitation facilities and these kinds of things. And then, so some full circle moment is happening there, some full moon moment, release, culmination, fruition, something coming into the awareness. Opposite, all the restructuring that's been going on in the 6th house of your daily affairs, your daily routine, health and wellness routines, this kind of thing, which is where Saturn and Pluto are conjuncting and all the other energy is happening in Capricorn. And so there is this time, it's a time of tension where these two things are vying for your attention and requiring some balancing act there. And then we've got Uranus stationing direct in your 10th house. So this is like a sudden happening, an aha moment, some insight, some kind of sudden event or liberation happening in the area of life that speaks to your career, your public reputation, your worldly ambitions, the legacy you wish to leave, these kinds of things, right? Is 10th house. And whatever shakeup happens there, big or small, know that ultimately it is for the better, because this is a conversation of ease and flow. Uranus is trying to help you out here, even if in the moment it seems a bit unsettling or shocking or surprising. And so that is what's going on for you, Leo. Please listen to the introduction, because that's where all of what's going to help this make sense is in the part 1 of this video, and the link to that is below. Okay, thank you so much for hanging around with me for this long. I do so appreciate it. I will see you next week for Witchy Wednesday, and keep me posted on how all of this big energy plays out for you, okay? Take good care. Bye-bye.